Humans are clearly omnivorous. However, plants do have compounds that are potentially problematic for us. I mean, that's clear. I mean, that's undeniable. You've got these giant global corporations with trillions of dollars of assets. What am I going to do? What am I, the average guy, going to do against that? There's not much you can do. The one thing you can do is you're not going to get the president of the United States or the UK prime minister all of a sudden saying, hey, everybody should be cutting out processed food. Because, you know, if you look at our USDA, I mean, their job is to promote all of agriculture. They're not going to come out and say, don't eat processed food, because most of the commodity foods go to that. It will be a grassroots revolution, if you will, on how to, you know, improve our food system, because it's clear it's killing us. 40 million diabetics, 50 million people with autoimmune disease. I mean, literally is causing people death and destruction and untold suffering. Yeah, so as you mentioned, I am a medical doctor. I was a practicing orthopedic surgeon for, you know, several decades, basically a lot of trauma surgery, you know, joint replacements, knee, hip replacements, shoulder replacements, fracture surgery, sports surgery. I did that for a number of years and started to notice that many of the conditions I was treating, particularly the degenerative conditions, were down to lifestyle, basically. And I figured out that certain diets could impact that. So that impacted me significantly, seeing patients getting better by a change of diet rather than, you know, a different drug or you know, some sort of procedure. And so it inspired me to really sort of pursue lifestyle and nutrition. And so I ended up stumbling across a group of people that were only eating meat, which I thought was completely crazy, as most people do. But you know, they had some convincing arguments, enough so that I was willing to try it myself. And I did it for 30 days. This is back in 2016. So about 8 years ago, and I was just amazed by how good I actually felt. And so I thought this was really interesting. And so I you know, started talking about it a little more. I convinced about 100 other people to do it over a period of time, and we kind of monitored them and tracked their results. And again, results were quite impressive. And then I ended up just, I guess out of luck, Joe Rogan saw that and invited me on a show to talk about it. And then a lot of people initially were exposed to me. Again, this is in 2017 now. And a lot of people didn't like it. Obviously, there's a lot of people that think eating meat is bad and all that type of stuff. And so I've been sort of battling that, I guess, for a number of years. And, you know, during that time, you know, a lot of people are not doing this, and a lot of people are seeing significant improvements in their health. And so I wrote a book on it called The Carnivore Diet. I was actually the first guy to sort of publicly name it that in any large way. So, you know, a lot of people do, quote unquote, the carnivore diet now. And I went back on Rogan, as you may know, a few months ago, and he is now very much changed. When he saw me, he was kind of curious and probably thought I was crazy like everybody else does. And now he's kind of gives it kind of a full-throated endorsement. So now I founded a company with a co-founder, Revero Health. And so we are now open in all 50 states. We have patients that we treat with lifestyle nutrition. Not everybody goes on a carnivore diet, but some do. And you know, so we are trying to change sort of the healthcare direction. Instead of just more drugs, more pills, more procedures, perhaps altering people's DNA and whatnot to match the life, to match the environment. We want people to, you know, maybe just eat better. That might be a better solution in my view. So yeah, that's and I'm currently also working with a bunch of people doing research on this diet as well, trying to get more, you know, hardcore scientific data out there. And so that's been a struggle as well, because trying to get people to pay for it is challenging, and finally starting to see some headway in that. So I think this year we'll have a number of studies coming out, which I'm pretty excited about. So anyway, that's kind of me in a nutshell.
Yeah, cool. I previously heard you mention that kind of diet, sleep, and exercise, like the main three kind of pillars of health. What is it about the diet that is so important?
Well, I think it's a couple things. One, meat is good nutrition. I mean, it's got pretty much everything we need, quite honestly. And it is highly bioavailable. It's well tolerated by most people. There's some people with medical issues, but obviously the absence of garbage that most of our diet, the UK is probably not quite as bad as the US, but it's getting there. The US now, something like 70% of our diet comes from ultra processed kind of junk food, low nutritional value in many cases, and a lot of kind of questionable ingredients perhaps. And so I think complete absence of that, because there's a lot of different, diets with names out there, paleo diet, keto diet, vegan diet, Mediterranean diet, and they all can be made into ultra processed nonsense and a label is put on them. But it's hard to do that with a carnivore diet. I mean, it's either meat or it's not. And it's I guess you could, mix it with a few other things, but generally it's a very low junk food diet, if completely zero. And I think a lot of people that struggle with food addictions find that abstinence is the most powerful way to go. And this is sort of an abstinence diet. It's a very sort of high level elimination diet that some people feel is overly restrictive, but I think for some people it is what they need to heal their issues. And so I think that is why it is very effective at a number of things, whether it's food addiction, obesity, diabetes, autoimmune disease, even mental health disorders. It's been very helpful with all those.
Yeah. Multiple times on other podcasts and in your own videos, I've heard you say that you don't think we should just dismiss cholesterol, because that is one of the most common concerns when people say, oh, I'm just going to eat meat. So, and how you speak to people and you say, look, you might actually be increasing your risk here, but a lot of the time they're like, oh, I don't mind because I've, cured all of these other problems I had. What do you think the role of cholesterol is in heart disease?
Well, I think it's part of the pathway to developing heart disease. If you have no cholesterol, you're very unlikely to develop atherosclerotic heart disease. There's a few edge cases where that could still occur, or certainly LDL cholesterol. But yeah, I mean, if you have no cholesterol, you're not going to develop heart disease. Now, if you have no cholesterol, are there some downsides to that? And I think there probably are. There are probably issues with mental health. There's probably issues with immune system. Our lipoproteins play a role in our immune system. So it's there. We need this stuff for a reason. And I know there's people on the cardiology side that say, well, there are genetic disorders where people have very, very low cholesterol and they don't die early, but that doesn't necessarily translate to a general population. I don't know that it is generalizable. And while I think that it is clearly part of the causal pathway, it is not the only factor. And it's probably, in my view, going to turn out to be what's called a dependent variable, meaning that its atherogenicidity or ability to cause heart disease also depends upon a number of other factors. And we're starting to see some of that research come out in this so-called lean mass hyperresponder data set, which is pretty compelling in my view. I know there's people that are still very dismissive of that or something like, but I think what we're going to find out, and again, this isn't set in stone yet, but I think there's a good chance that it may be that elevated, LDL cholesterol or ApoB in the setting of extremely good metabolic health is minimally contributory to heart disease. And I think that's possibly what we're going to see. Can't say that with 100% because the studies aren't quite done, but they are. We'll have some really good data on that later this year. And I think that's something. So for now, if someone goes on a low carbohydrate diet and they eat more fat, because that's where their energy has to come from, and their LDL cholesterol goes up or their ApoB goes up, I think the safe thing to do is to, get some imaging, particularly if you're over 40, to see what's going on. Are you having disease? I mean, there was a nice study out of Denmark last year looking at this phenomenon where people that had atherosclerotic disease, as seen by something called a CAC score, a coronary artery calcium scan, if they had atherosclerotic disease already, the LDL cholesterol predicted something called MACE, major adverse cardiac events. They did not have any, then the cholesterol had no bearing on that. So again, it's probably this scenario of you have the genetic, environmental, metabolic milieu, if you will, to develop heart disease, and therefore LDL cholesterol is a problem. And another subset of population that doesn't have that same environment don't seem to be as high risk for cardiovascular disease. So I think that's where we're at in here in 2024, that it may not be an issue.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I've heard this idea that I'm pretty sure in the pathway the cholesterol has to be kind of damaged or modified in some way for the macrophages to take it up.
Yeah, I mean, there's a that's oxidized. Some people say that when it gets into the endothelium or the subendothelial space, it becomes oxidized there as well. So it's a little bit. I mean, yes, I do think that is part of the pathway. How it gets oxidized and where it gets oxidized and when it gets oxidized is a little bit controversial. But yeah, that is likely very accurate. That oxidation or damage or glycation, for that matter, makes it more athogenic.
Yeah, it's just a question of whether it's getting trapped in the arterial wall because the concentration's too high, or it's getting oxidized like as it's traveling around.
Right.
I've heard you kind of push back or maybe kind of soften the blow on this idea that some plant compounds are potentially harmful. It seems for most people that the 80-20 is kind of just cutting out the processed foods. Who do you think benefits most from a carnivore diet, like a strict one?
Well, I think people that struggle with binge eating disorder, food addiction, clearly, I think the abstinence is incredibly helpful. I think that a lot of people with autoimmune conditions seem to benefit. Those are ones that probably this will work where other things won't. Like I said, there's a lot of ways to get healthy. There's a lot of ways to cut out processed food and garbage. So I think those are the major people that would probably have the most benefit from that. I mean, outside of that, I mean, there, and people that have tried other things, that have been unsuccessful. And I think there are a lot of people out there. So I think it's a reasonably decent sized segment of the population. When we look at our, particularly in the U.S. population, we have getting close to 40 million diabetics in the country. We have some estimates up to 50 million people with autoimmune disease, and you're already up to close to 100,000 people there. That's darn near a third of the population. So I think there's quite a wide variety of people that this is probably the best option for them. Now, people that are overweight can lose weight on that. People with diabetes can sort of improve enough in case they reverse their diabetes with that. People with mental health disorders, in many cases, find that this is very, very beneficial to them. So I think there's, anybody with an illness could stand to benefit. I know there's people that just want to do it because they're like, oh, I'm young and I'm fit, but I want to see if it makes me into Superman or something like that, because they've heard stories about that. But yeah, I mean, as a physician, my main concern is with those people that are sick, and whether somebody else wants to do it just to do it and put a little name on it, call themselves Carnivore or Carl or something like that. I don't really care so much about that, but I think it's generally a pretty healthy diet, quite honestly.
Yeah. So do you think it's because these people have the diseases that they have, they're kind of unable to tolerate and like more sensitive to these compounds in plants?
Well, I mean, it certainly could be. I mean, like I said, yes, plants do have compounds that are potentially problematic for us. I mean, that's clear. I mean, that's undeniable. Most people tolerate them. I mean, this is why, most people on the planet have eaten plants, right? In my book, I state humans are clearly omnivorous. However, as a therapeutic protocol, and I do think humans tend to do well with a more carnivorous approach. I mean, I think that's also plausible and very reasonable within the evolutionary framework. But yeah, I mean, I think what happens is we have a damaged gut. I think the modern diet is so atrociously bad that it significantly damages our gut, so that we may now be more sensitive to these things. And I think that's in part what we're seeing. So if we didn't have this sort of ultra processed high level of toxic food environment, then probably you'd have less people developing autoimmune diseases, and probably you'd have less people having sort of quote unquote negative reactions to plants or plant compounds like we do seem to see.
Yeah. And would you say like kind of chemicals in the environment could also be affecting like gut permeability?
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable thing to say. I mean, the question is the concentrations, because if you're wearing cologne or lotion on your body, how much of it actually makes it into the gut? Probably smaller than what we're eating, for sure. I mean, obviously when we're eating things, that's definitely going to get into the gut. So But I do think, some of the modern, just household products and things like that probably have maybe a small, but maybe perhaps in some people a significant role. So, I mean, I think that's fair to say.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you're mostly concerned with the people who have the diseases, which makes 100% sense. For people who don't have this, do you still see people have improved performance on a fully carnivore diet, or is it not really any different compared to kind of omnivore?
Well, I think it depends on the person. It depends on the person's activity and what they're doing. If we look at athletes, I mean, clearly, carbohydrates can be beneficial for athletes, particularly if they are adapted to using carbohydrates, which honestly most people are. I mean, that's clear. If you are adapted to using carbohydrates, then carbohydrates are going to improve your performance. However, there's a growing body of literature that suggests that someone who is well adapted to utilizing, say, and preferentially using fat for most of their intensity. And we've seen that we used to think the threshold was something around 60%. VO2 max used to be like the threshold with crossover point, between fat oxidation and glycolytic activity. And that number has been shown to be up to as high as 90% for some athletes that have been long-term adapted to, say, ketogenic diets. So I think that there are certainly people, I mean, myself in one, I mean, I've broken numerous world records on a concept 2 row. In fact, I'm going to break some more this month on a purely meat-based zero carb diet. And so I think it depends on the athlete, and most athletes, if they're not sick and they like eating carbohydrates, which most of them do, I don't see a real reason for them to necessarily change that. But there are some. I've seen some very high level athletes, professional rugby players, NFL football players, mixed martial artists, uh, football or quote unquote soccer players, triathletes, ultra endurance runners, at very high levels, all do well on a carnivore diet. So it's doable, but again, do most people want to do that? Do most people need to do that? Probably not.
Yeah. You've previously been quite damning of the food and drug companies, and I think rightly so. I've heard you mention before that one of the ways to kind of fix this kind of broken system is we kind of need alternatives such as Revero. But from my experience, I think it's going to have to be bottom up, because I don't think the regulators and government are going to come and fix it all anytime soon by the looks of it. So, yeah, how do we fix it, Shawn?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, it's not like the pharmaceutical industry is gonna, one day roll up their, their bags and say, "Oh, sorry, bad, we made a mistake." It's not, they're going to continue to make massive amounts of money, billions and hundreds of billions of dollars on new drugs, and that industry is not going away anytime soon. And you're right, you're not going to get the president of the United States or the UK prime minister all of a sudden saying, "Hey, everybody should be eating just meat," and that's not going to happen anytime soon. Or even just saying cutting out processed food, because if you look at, like, for instance, our USDA, the U.S. Drug and Agricultural organization. I mean, their job is to promote all of agriculture, right? So that's, and all these commodity products, soybean, sugar, corn, rice, wheats, in addition to meat, dairy, eggs, chicken, pork, and all that thing. They're not going to come out and say don't eat processed food, because most of the commodity foods go to that. I mean, you think about how much stuff has corn in it, how much of it has wheat in it. It's all the junk food that's on the shelves. And so they're never going to say that. So we're never going to have a government sponsored cut out processed food, because that would significantly damage our economy, quite honestly. You think about it, all these restaurants would go out of business, all these food manufacturers, grocery stores, I mean, basically you would have that. So that's not going to happen. So it is going to be a bottom up, consumer led sort of revolution. And I think we're starting to see some of that. We're starting to see some pushback where people just, people feel frustrated because they can't, you've got these giant global corporations with, in many cases, trillions of dollars of assets. What am I going to do? What am I, the average guy, going to do against that? There's not much you can do. The one thing you can do is vote with your pocketbook, so to speak. You every time you make a buying decision, you impact those companies, and you may not be able to shut that company down, but you might be able to say, I don't want to consume these unhealthy products, and eventually they'll get the message, and they'll start to have to adapt, because if they want to stay in business, they have to respond to the market, and it is going to be market force driven. It is, fortunately through social media, more and more people are starting to get this message, and some of them, not all of them, probably a minority of them are starting to pick it up, but it's certainly growing. I mean, and I think it's, I think it's going to continue to grow, and it will be a like you said, a bottom up, a grassroots sort of revolution, if you will, on how to improve our food system, because it's clear it's killing us. I mean, literally is causing people death and destruction and untold suffering. And I mean, I don't know how much longer people want to take that. I mean, there's people that, particularly younger people, they don't, because they feel healthy, and they're like, well, I want to eat the blue food. I want to eat the stuff that's brightly colored and fancy and has some, funny marketing campaign, and be trendy to eat, whatever, no matter what it is. And, it's not until you 30, 40, 50 years of age, you start to realize that, yes, this has been a real problem. So, to your credit, I mean, you're obviously quite a bit younger. I mean, sort of seeing that early is going to give you a big advantage over maybe a lot of your peers that are just content to eat the garbage, and they'll reap the consequences of that at some point. Some of them already are.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a good point that you said, like, what can one person do against, like trillions of kind of dollars that these companies have. But I think another important part of it is, if you just kind of focus on making yourself healthier, and then the people around you, like, people will then look to you and just be like, well, how did you get healthier? If all the people around you are like suffering, and then it kind of multiplies out because you've done something, and people want to emulate that.
Yeah, this is, I mean, as much as I think that high-level quality studies need to be done, scientific studies need to be done, and like I said, will be done. That's not what really inspires most people. Most people are inspired by the people around them, and if they see somebody doing something, or there's somebody that they can relate to, a particular, somebody they can say, I'm in this very similar situation. This is how I fixed it. That's what a lot of people do, and that's very inspiring. So yeah, I mean, I've seen, thousands of people now that have talked about the fact that they got healthier, and then their family jumped on board, or their friends came on board. And so I think that's really how it's done. Just one person at a time, influencing a couple others, and then those people hopefully will influence more, and we just kind of grow and grow and grow.
Yeah, like being an example. A few times already you've mentioned that we're going to be getting some more kind of whole food, meat-based diet studies this year. You mentioned it on Joe Rogan as well. So are you able to share any more information about that?
Yeah, well, one of the reasons when I went on Joe Rogan, I was complaining of the fact that we could not get funding for these studies, even from the beef industry itself. And since that podcast, I've had a lot of people actually reach out to me and said, hey, I would like to help fund some studies. And so we certainly are going to do a couple studies in regard to a carnivore or very close to carnivore diet versus diabetes in a couple different populations. So that certainly is going to happen. I'm actually in talks with putting the funding and the research teams together, as we speak right now. So that looks like those are going to happen, a couple this year. One might be a long-term, like 2 or 3 year study, so that's going to take a while, but one will be a little shorter term study. I think we're going to get some studies on certain autoimmune diseases. Perhaps we'll start out with inflammatory bowel disease, so that would be Crohn's disease and also colitis, because a lot of people are doing that. We may even be able to do a randomized control trial comparing a carnivore diet to a whole food plant-based diet, which I think would be lots of fun to see the results on that particular disease set, and then probably a couple more autoimmune diseases. Because like I said, as I mentioned, I think this is where some of the biggest impacts we can make are. So those things should be happening this year. That's in conjunction with some of these studies that are coming out on saturated fat and LDL cholesterol. And so I think we're going to have a shift in our overall understanding of nutrition, and particularly low carb nutrition, because I don't think they're the same thing. I don't think you can compare somebody on a low food, animal-based diet, low carbohydrate, animal-based diet compared to someone on a standard higher carb diet. I think they're literally almost two completely different issues. And I think the results are very different, as far as what things mean when it comes to particularly things like biomarkers like cholesterol.
Yeah. You said there that, and earlier, that autoimmune illnesses seem to largely benefit from carnivore. I've heard some stories which are just incredible things you wouldn't even imagine, including like Tourette's and also like reversing dementia, I believe, in some cases. Are there any other kind of really wild stories out there that people just be like, there's no way you can reverse that carnivore's helped?
Well, yeah, I mean, and you mentioned Tourette. First time I saw a Tourette's person do that, I was quite surprised. But now I've seen at least half a dozen of those cases. Multiple sclerosis is another one we've had some pretty good success with. One of the ones that really sort of kind of blew my mind was there's a condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is it's a genetic connective tissue disorder. You're born with it literally, and it often results in people with very unstable joints. So sometimes their joints will just dislocate, and it's obviously not a fun thing to have. And I was talking to a 57-year-old female who was also a physician. She worked in the emergency room, and she had Ehlers-Danlos her whole life. And she was at the point where she'd go to bed at night, and every day she'd wake up and she'd have 3 or 4 of her joints were dislocated when she woke up in the morning. So she would spend her morning putting her joints back in place. And then she would go to work, and about half the time one of her joints would fall out of place at work. And that was her life. And of course, her joints were starting to wear out because they're repeatedly, popping in and out of joint. She went carnivore, and within a month, she stopped having all dislocations and has never had another dislocation since that time. And so I thought it just didn't make sense to me, because I'm like, this is literally a genetic connective tissue disorder, but somehow the carnivore diet somehow fixed that. And I still struggle to explain why that is. And I've now seen many, many, many people with Ehlers-Danlos now with very similar stories. So that's one of the ones that sticks out is wow, this is really, really interesting. I've seen people that were morbidly obese. We're talking 700, 800 pounds, food addicts, have tried every diet, in some cases, bariatric, gastric bypass surgery, to no avail. I mean, every diet you can think of, they go carnivore, and for the first time in their life, they're able to drop 300, 400, 500 pounds. Just, it's like almost magic for them. So
And keep it
been
off.
some really, really, and keep it off. Yeah. And there's been some really, really significant and very powerful anecdotal, albeit anecdotal things, but you can't just dismiss those because they're anecdotal, because they truly are happening, and they're happening by the thousands at this point.
Yeah, that's incredible. When I was speaking to Anthony Chafee, he kind of said a similar thing. Like, we just see diseases just go away, and we a lot of the time we don't know why, but they just go away, and just like, okay, we'll keep going with this then. On another podcast, I saw you kind of say that you almost have to be the kind of troll meme guy kind of on Instagram and on other social medias to try and bring this kind of message more to the mainstream, because there's obviously no large organizations talking about the benefits of eating meat. How does it feel to be at like kind of the front of like this carnivore wave, because you've been a pioneer in this space in many ways?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like myself on the tip of the spear, and so obviously I get a lot of resistance and a lot of negativity sent my way. I've been called everything negative you can possibly think of, and I'm fine with it. I mean, I say that, I mean, people that talk to me over a period of time know that I'm very serious about this, and I truly am interested in the science behind this, and truly interested in the fact that we're helping people. But at the same time, the way this message gets out there largely has been through social media, and for good or bad, the way social media works is humor and entertainment and, sometimes goofy stuff. And so I'm like, well, if that's what you got to do, that's what you got to do. I mean, I do plenty of these sort of long form podcasts, and I'm using any and all methods that I can think of to share this method. And some people, quite honestly, some people don't like the way I do some of these things, because they feel like it's not as professional as they would expect upon someone who's a doctor, right? But like I said, at the end of the day, the more people that hear about this, whatever way, whatever, if something goes viral because it's a little bit goofy and it gets more people to pay attention, then maybe they'll hear the real intended message. So it's kind of, yes, it's kind of humor, it's distraction, it's goofy, it's sometimes it's pointless. But the major point is, let's get more eyes on this stuff. Let's get more ears on this stuff, because that's just the way it works. That unfortunately, I'm not given a national speaking audience with the legislature or anything like that. I mean, it just hasn't happened. Maybe it will one day. So until that time, I'll just continue to do what I do, and people that appreciate it. Some people enjoy the fun, the humor to it. Some people get offended by it. I mean, in this day and age, everybody's offended by everything. So I'm like, whatever. You can go follow. You can follow somebody else. You can follow Ben Bickman or somebody like that. Ben's very nice, and I love Ben. He's a good guy. And he even tells me, man, I'm glad you do what you do, so I don't have to do that stuff. So I am kind of doing a little bit of the dirty work for other people, and there are other people behind me, kind of quietly golf clapping behind me, but they're afraid to do it themselves because they don't want to get their feet dirty or something. But anyway, that's why I do what I do.
Yeah, I imagine there's quite a lot of kind of purpose and, I guess, almost responsibility on your shoulders, kind of to keep pushing this out there, because you've seen it help so many people.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of things. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I have to continue to spread this message, and it's also I have to walk the walk. I mean, you probably see I eat steak every day on camera just to show people I'm serious about this. This is actually me doing it. It's not me saying, oh, I've been carnivore for 50 years or something. Because I think there's people that come up there and just suddenly say, there's no rule. Really? Sure. Are you sure? Because anybody can say anything, quite honestly. But I mean, I've been documenting my journey very intentionally on social media for the world. You can go back to 2017 when I said I'm going to start, or 2016 when I said I'm going to start eating all meat. I mean, it's literally, there's a tweet about that. You can see there's probably 1,000 videos of me eating steak, if not more, on camera. So I mean, it's clearly that I'm eating a hell of a lot of steak. So anyway,
yeah, I think that's for certain. I think the part about kind of making it entertaining and the memes and kind of stuff, I think that definitely does work. I imagine you're familiar with the account, the Seed Oil Disrespecter.
I've seen a little bit of that. I don't follow it, but I've seen a few tweets or whatever from that. So yeah, I mean, it's I mean, like, there's a lot of people that have these. I mean, basically they're just meme account completely. I mean, that's basically their purpose, and they're often anonymous, and so they can hide behind. I mean, if I were anonymous, I could say a lot more sort of controversial and offensive stuff. But I choose not to be anonymous. I think it's important that I walk the walk. I actually show, hey, this is a real person really doing this stuff, and these are results. And it depends on who you talk to. I mean, people that are pro carnivore will say, good job, Dr. Baker. We think you're great. You're doing well. You're inspiring. And then you have, kind of the vegan people say, my God, I think you look like you're about to die and you smell bad. And, I mean, it's just funny. It's like a Rorschach, picture. It's like, show somebody a picture of me, and some people say he's great. Other people say he's the worst person in the world. So it is what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, but that account specifically has had quite a lot of big names kind of follow them, I think, including like John Cena, because I guess the memes, it gets it out to a wider audience.
Yeah, you're right. Exactly right. That's what we have either evolved or devolved into, meme wars. And, but it is, I mean, some of these memes have driven policy, quite honestly. It's quite fascinating that we have that.
Yeah. I've heard you say before that we're kind of in a war almost for our food sovereignty. Another area that people are trying to reclaim sovereignty is their money, and I know you're a fan of Bitcoin. Why is that?
Well, I mean, I'm not by any stretch of the imagination a cryptocurrency expert, and if honestly, the only thing I've messed with Bitcoin, I don't do any of the other stuff. I don't quite honestly understand it to the extent that many other people do. I've met some of the sort of the huge proponents of Bitcoin, which also happen to be carnivore. Saifedean Amos, Michael Goldstein, Robert Breedlove, and some of these guys that are big advocates for that. And, it makes sense to me, at least at a basic level, enough to where I, invested a little bit. I'm not selling my home to buy Bitcoin or anything like that, but I do have, I guess a smallish, getting bigger investment in that. Um, and I think that, yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see because, I mean, clearly we're seeing devaluation of the dollar, inflation of the dollar, devaluation of the currency around the world is eroding. I mean, I think there are, uh, I think some of the concerns that they have are justified and valid. And I think that, I mean, obviously we're going to some sort of digital currency, most likely, whether it's through the central banks or through Bitcoin or some other fashion. I think that is going to happen one way or the other. And so it depends on who do you want to control the money. Do you want a centralized bank to control the money, or do you want the sort of population as a whole to have it sort of democratically control the money? And to me, it makes sense. It's a little more fair in that way. Um, so I think it makes sense to me. But I'm by no means a Bitcoin expert.
Yeah. I just think it's really interesting to see the crossover because it makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like decentralized health and decentralized
Yeah,
money kind of intersecting there.
yeah,
Yeah. To James Smith on his podcast, you said that they were like covering in Australia. They're covering kids in tent cloth and spraying them down with all sorts of like toxic chemicals. What are your thoughts on like the sunscreen and sun exposure? Because I know there's been a lot of fear around that.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think that obviously human beings evolved without sunscreen. And at least some of us evolved in very warm, sunny environments. I mean, if you look at, I mean, at least the major sort of belief in the evolutionary model is, humans sort of originated in Africa and then spread out throughout the various portions of the world. And so I don't think we were, hiding in caves the whole time. And we were outside in the sun, and probably we weren't all dying of skin cancer. And so I think that, uh, I do think that the food impacts our ability to tolerate the sun to some degree. And so, I mean, there's reasonable evidence to suggest that. So the sun obviously is good for us. I mean, the sun helps us to convert vitamin D. I mean, there's other benefit. I mean, there's numerous, mental health has been clearly tied to sun exposure. There are numerous reasons to be outside in the sun. And so I don't think it is something we need to, there's people that advocate if you sit by a window, you should be slathering yourself up with, um, you know, uh, SPF 100 or something like that. And so I think that, I don't advocate people going out there until they burn or anything like that. But I do think that I clearly am seeing, anecdotally, but again, to the tune of many, many thousands of people saying that they have better sun tolerance by changing their diet, but not consuming the processed food, the sugary stuff, perhaps some of the oils don't burn as easily. And so I think there's probably something there that, I do think sunshine is a good thing. I think most people would agree with that. I mean, getting sunburned is not ideal. So I mean, but I think I think your sun tolerance improves in the context of a healthy overall diet and environment.
Yeah, I agree for sure. Obviously, you don't want to be getting burned, but there are many benefits, and it's interesting to see how we're kind of spending more time inside and using more sunscreen, but like skin cancer rates are still not really coming down. So yeah,
Yeah, and it's like melanoma, for instance, which is the most deadly of the skin cancers. Squamous cell carcinoma and basal cell, which tend to be non-lethal. They tend to be locally destructive and pretty easily dealt with generally. But melanoma is something that can literally kill you. And melanoma commonly occurs on the bottom of the foot, in the genitals, places that never see the sun. And so, and that, in fact, uh, if I'm not mistaken, the epidemiologic data shows that melanoma is not really directly correlated to sun exposure. So it's kind of one of those interesting things that, wait a minute, maybe all these skin cancers aren't necessarily, um, down to that. But I mean, repeated burning does certainly increase your risk for basal cell carcinoma, squamous cell carcinoma. That's clear. The question is, can you be in the sun and not burn? And can you do it without sunscreen? I think the answer is yes. And I think diet does impact that.
yeah. Someone I had on my podcast who's a big fan of the sun is Dr. Jack Cruz, and he said he refused to come on your podcast because he wants. I think he said he wanted you to kind of see his view that the sun and circadian rhythms are potentially more important to health than lifting weights and having big muscles. Do you have anything to say to that?
Well, I wasn't aware. I wasn't aware of that. I've never talked with Jack Cruz. I mean, I've been aware of him for many, many years, and I certainly don't disagree that I think the sun is very, very important. I think there is certainly quite a bit of evidence around circadian biology. Is it more or less important than food? I think that's very debatable. I think food is incredibly important, particularly these days. And I think there's certainly populations that get plenty of sun exposure that are, I mean, you can look at like India, for instance. I mean, India is a hot tropical environment. People are outside all the time. They get plenty of sun exposure, and their population health is miserable. So I don't know that, you can say it's number one thing is sun exposure and circadian. I think it's in there. I think it's in the discussion. But to say that sits above all other things, I don't know that the evidence is there. Now, I'm sure he can make an argument some way to say that, but I don't think you can just get good sunlight exposure and eat a trash diet and be healthy. I just don't think that happens. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe all I gotta do, I can eat Twinkies and Doritos, and just as long as I lay in the sun for 4 hours a day, I'm good. I suspect that's not accurate, though.
Yeah, I'm not sure. He thinks food is important. I think he disagrees that the thing he takes issue with is the people talk a lot about like building muscle for longevity, and I think he says that he thinks sun is more important than kind of necessarily like weightlifting, because he thinks that's kind of a bit more unnatural, I guess, if we're taking that evolutionary lens. But yeah.
Clearly, those that are in the upper percentile of strength do better as they age. I mean, that's pretty undeniable. And so whether it gives you an extra 10 years of life or not, I don't know that anybody can make that claim, but certainly it improves your quality of life. And it doesn't mean you have to be the strongest guy and break world records, but you just need to be in the upper third, upper quartile. And I think that clearly provides a benefit. There's numerous studies that point to strength being tied to not only quality of life and absence of many diseases, but also longevity. So I think there is a role for activity. And I know there's people that just don't like to do it, and they sort of justify that, well, I can just sit out in the sun and I mean, again, there's people that'll recommend that low protein is also a way to longevity based on certain animal studies. And yeah, there's a dichotomy. I mean, you may be able to extend your life by eating low protein, but what it results in is frailty, and it's depending on how do you want to live your 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. Do you want to be the weak, frail person that can't do anything? And that's you live in this very narrow subset of what you can do, versus somebody that might have a more, wider option of things they can do based upon their own physical capacity. And I personally, and I choose so for myself, and I sort of encourage other people to, stay strong. And I think that's beneficial. And it's easier to be stronger when you're older than if you're stronger when you're younger. So as a young person, one of the goals should be putting on some muscle and maintaining it. And I think it's a worthy pursuit. I think quality of life is better.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. You said the ideal outcome is kind of Revero to grow into a multi-billion-dollar business, and you retire quite rich because you've helped so many people out. What kind of, for the next few years and maybe decades, for Revero to kind of get to that point where you're helping so many people, what kind of needs to happen?
Well, obviously it costs money to grow a company of that size. So we fortunately had a lot of people invest in us, and we will likely have a lot more people invest in us, particularly as we have gone from proof of concept into execution right now. And so we have, for a startup company, we have 6,000 people on our waiting list, which for this type of company is phenomenal. So we're off to a very good start, and assuming we can deliver, and that is my focus, is making sure we can deliver. So we have clinical teams that are dedicated to improving the quality of people's lives. And I think we can deliver that and then scale, then the sky is the ceiling, so to speak. You've got no reason we can't continue to grow to reach. To be a $1 billion company, you need something like 20,000, 25,000 customers, which is not that far away. And then, to get into the multi-billions, you're looking at, 100,000, quarter of a million people. And I think that's also very true. I mean, if you look at the number of people that are suffering, just in the United States alone, like I mentioned, 40 million diabetics, 50 million people with autoimmune disease. We've got something like over 100 million people suffering from obesity. I mean, all those things are potentially dramatically improvable by this. Now, we're not going to get all those people, but we're going to get a portion of them. And we only need, we get 1% of the sick people in the company. That's, and that's just in the US, and you start going globally. So it's very conceivable that we could have a big impact on the world. And I jokingly say that, yeah, I mean, certainly I'd love to, be able to make decent income from this and retire and buy a cattle ranch or something like that. That would be sort of my sort of dream. But I mean, I don't get there unless I can help a lot of people. And I think that's a really important aspect, because, you can get there by, doing some very sketchy things. I mean, there's a lot of people that have, basically harmed people and have become incredibly rich by that. I don't want any interest in that. If I can't help people, then I don't want to, I mean, it would be very easy for me to sell some sketchy overpriced supplements. I mean, I'm at a point where I could very easily do that, right? And there's other people that do. They get a little bit of popularity, and then they got their own protein powder or their own whatever, liver pills or something like that. And I think that is, to me, it's a little bit, I just don't appreciate that. I think that's not really helping people in a way that I want to do so anyway. And I think in many cases, you're just taking advantage of people's trust in you. And a lot of people do trust me, for good or bad. And I want to make good on that. I mean, I honestly, this is why I'm so passionate about what I do. This is why I'm trying to get research done rather than just preying upon people's trust and selling them some overpriced product, which I don't have any desire to do.
Yeah. The Silicon Valley investor and entrepreneur Naval Ravikant says that one way to get wealthy is to give society what it wants but doesn't yet know how to get at scale. And I think that kind of perfectly sums up what you guys are doing. People want to be healthy. A lot of people don't know how, and it sounds like you've got the scale part of it. So yeah, I think that's a good place to wrap up. Thanks, Shawn, for doing this.
I'll just add, it's interesting because Naval, my co-founder, knows Raval quite nicely, and they literally were at a dinner party she put together, and Naval was there, and they served just a bunch of meat. So it's kind of funny that you mentioned him. So anyway,
that's funny.
Yeah.
So yeah, thanks for doing this. It's been a great conversation. Where can people go to find more of your work?
Well, certainly for those in the U.S. that are interested in perhaps having a physician that understands this stuff, Revero.com is a great place to learn about what we're doing. Of course, I have social media, so I am on, let's say, Instagram at Shawn, SHAWN, Baker, BAKER 1967. I'm on X, which formerly is Twitter, at SBakerMD, and I've got a YouTube channel, Shawn Baker MD, and I even got a TikTok, Shawn Baker MD. So
yeah.
Anyway, those are where you can find. I also, Carnivore.diet is another place where I'm there every day doing meetings. In fact, that's where I'm going right now to conduct a meeting / podcast. But yeah, I'm in a number of places. Obviously, the book Carnivore.diet, or the Carnivore Diet is the book. So if anybody's interested in reading about how to get started, it's a pretty, I think most people regard it as a very definitive book on carnivore, and it's very, very useful for people that are interested in starting.
Awesome. I'll put all the links to that below. Yeah, thanks for doing this, Shawn, and keep up the great work. I think you're really helping a lot of people.
Appreciate it, Owen. Thanks. Appreciate for having me on, and I'm sure I'll talk to you down the road, man.
Sure, let's do it. All right, see ya.
Bye-bye.